Welcome back again, Advanced VITA volunteers. We are going to be discussing credit for sick leave and family leave for certain self-employed individuals. For those of you who are following these advanced topics, we just learned about business income and some self-employment adjustments. And so this kind of ties into that discussion. But this is a temporary type of credit. It's a refundable credit. So it's something that we are learning brand new for this year, and we're not expecting to see it again in a future year unless things change. So as the name or names imply, this applies to certain self-employed individuals, and they can claim this refundable credit for sick or family leave that was needed as a result of the coronavirus. And even though this is all kind of lumped together, we're really looking at 4 different credits that are related and in a lot of ways very similar to each other. But I think it's helpful to remember that there's 4 of them. So 2 of those are the credit for sick leave, but depending on whether this leave was taken early in the year before March 31st or after April 1st through September 30th, there's some little differences in what qualifies and where they show up on the forms. And then we also have credit for family leave, and again we have one credit that applies to the early part of the year before March 31st, and the other credit applies from April 1st through September 30th. So when we look at the forms, of course our clients are going to come into us with their intake forms, and there's no specific question about sick leave, so it's really important for us as we have self-employed individuals coming in to make sure to ask, did you take any days off of work, or were you unable to work due to the coronavirus or caring for somebody because of the coronavirus. If we find out that that is the case and they qualify for these credits, then the information will flow from Form 7202, and all 4 of these credits are calculated on this form. So there's a part 1, 2, 3, and 4. So part 1 and 2 is the sick leave and the family leave for that earlier part of the year, and then parts 3 and 4 are the sick leave and family leave for the later part of the year. And it's important to note that there's 1 form per taxpayer. So for our married filing joint taxpayers, they may have 1 form if it was just 1 taxpayer that took time off, or they might even have 2 forms if both. So once things are calculated on Form 7202, then they would flow on to Schedule 3, and there is line 13B, the qualified sick and family leave credits, and then of course from Schedule 3 it would flow from there on to the 1040. Let's look at the requirements for these credits. So the credit for sick leave allows our taxpayers to claim up to $511 per lost work day. And this work day has to have been missed because the taxpayer was subject to COVID quarantine or an isolation order, or they might have been advised by a healthcare professional to self-quarantine, or they might have had symptoms and were seeking diagnosis. Now, for the later credit, the one that's applicable for April 1st through September 30th, we have a couple of additional scenarios that could help our taxpayer to meet the qualifications. And so if they were seeking or awaiting the results of a test or a diagnosis and they had exposure to COVID-19, or if they were unable to work pending the test results or diagnosis for some reason. And then we have our credit for family leave. So the credit for family leave would give our taxpayers up to $200 per lost workday. And for that, they might have missed work because they were caring for somebody who was subject to COVID quarantine or an isolation order. They might have been caring for a child whose school or place of care was closed due to COVID, or caring for a child whose care provider was unavailable due to COVID. So that's like our taxpayers who might have another individual, not a school, caring for their child. And then here again, we have some additional possible reasons added in after that April 1st transition between the two credits. So they might have been accompanying an individual to an immunization or caring for another individual who was recovering from an injury or illness or disability or other condition related to that immunization. So for the purpose of these credits, what does a child include? So in this case, it could be a biological child, an adopted child, a foster, or a stepchild. It could be a legal ward or a child for whom the taxpayer is standing in loco parentis, meaning that they have the requirement to care for and the financial responsibility over this child. And it could also be an adult child who has a disability and is incapable of self-care due to that disability. And there are some differences in the number of days that can be claimed for these credits. So for the credit for sick leave, the earlier part of the year, the taxpayer is allowed to claim up to 10 days, but those 10 days are reduced by any days that were claimed in 2020. And then the credit for after April, then 2020 wouldn't have been a concern, and so then they have up to 10 days for that credit. The credit for family leave for the early part of the year gives our taxpayers up to 50 days. But here again, that's reduced by any days that they claimed in 2020. And then the later credit, again, there's no reduction of days, and they get an additional 10 days, so they get 60 days altogether. So let's look at the calculation. So the way that this calculates, we would take the net earnings, or taxpayer will take the net earnings from self-employment, and that's divided by 260 days. And that will equal the average daily self-employment income. So we take the average daily self-employment income and then we plug that into a new calculation. We multiply that average daily self-employment income by the allowable lost work days. And remember, there is a limit depending on the credit as to how much that daily self-employment income could come to, either $511 or $200, again, depending on the credit. So multiplying the daily income by the allowable lost work days gives you the credit amount. Now, it's important to note too that taxpayers can elect to use the prior year self-employment income to compute these credits. So that can be an added benefit for our taxpayers who perhaps their income was greatly reduced due to COVID. And they had a higher income in the prior year. So they will need to have in order to calculate based on that, they'll need to be bringing in their prior year return so that you can pick up that number from Schedule SE line 6. And then there are a couple of limitations to think about as we're calculating this. The taxpayers can't count the same lost workday for both the sick leave credit and the family leave credit. And then the amounts are going to be limited if the taxpayer also took family and sick leave as an employee. So some of our taxpayers are not only self-employed, they have some self-employment income, but they are also employees and they may have a W-2. So what we're going to be looking for is on the W-2 in box 14, the employer should have reported an amount due to the employee family and sick leave there. And if they didn't report it there, then there should be a separate statement associated with that leave. And then it'll be important to remind our taxpayers that they do need to keep records of these of this leave and the reasoning for it. They'll need to keep the date or the dates that they used the leave, a statement of the COVID-19 related reason and written support for that statement, as well as a statement as to why they were unable to work or telework during that time. Now, we don't need to see those records. We're just advising our clients that they should have them just in case anybody ever wanted to look at that in an audit or anything in the future. So we've finished our fairly short discussion of the self-employment sick and family leave credits. As far as Link and Learn, you won't see any questions for this topic. For those of you who are in Accounting 496, there are a couple of questions in your skill check quiz on Canvas, so you could expect to know a little bit about this credit. And then as far as tax layer, we don't have an additional practice return for this topic. But again, it is important to be aware of this. And if you have a client come in during the season with self-employment income, of course, we're going to ask, did you have any days that you were unable to work due to COVID, and have a conversation around the circumstances of that. And then you'll be able to access your 4012, publication 4012 or publication 4491 to help guide you through the process of entering it into the return. So that's all for now. Thanks.